Today we are going over the king of the north and south found in Daniel chapter 11. Now, many find this passage, which details a long saga between two mystical characters, the king of the north and the king of the south, to be puzzling and hard to understand. Some say you can't interpret it. Others endeavor to interpret it, but misinterpret its symbols, wrongly applying the titles. But a correct understanding of this prophecy is absolutely necessary for our generation to choose the right path. Keeping this in mind, we're going to unpack and decode this chapter. But first, if you like great content like this, please make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification button. Let's get started. So the whole purpose of this prophecy, this whole delineation of the kings of the north and the kings of the south, is to get us down to the very last one, because he has evil intents against God's people. We're going to see that the last king of the north is to form a church-state confederacy against the people of God. Now, some people say that this book is sealed and we can't even understand it, but Daniel 2 says, "But thou, O Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book, even to the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased." We are definitely living in the time where vehicular traffic and aircrafts are running to and fro, and knowledge is so increased. I mean, this is the age of information. So we are living in the time of the end, and it's definitely unsealed. Now, to properly identify these two kings, we have to have a key to understand the prophecy. So there are two factors to this key that make the door of understanding open. Okay? The door of understanding open. First, the prophecy spans thousands of years, so the titles are transferred to various regimes as time progresses. The second factor is that Palestine, or the Holy Land, ancient Egypt and Israel together, are the point of compass. To put it another way, if the regime ruled mainly territories to the north of this point of compass, they are titled King of the North. If the regime ruled mainly territories south of the region, they are titled King of the South. So, the Bible hides the King of the North and the King of the South's identities until the time of the end. It does this through treating each ruling entity as one character through the course of time. In reality, many different kingdoms or regimes are introduced through the two lines of kings. They are introduced with either the pronoun he or the title King of the North or King of the South. Let's read some statements from a great book on this subject, Track 12, page 66 and 64. The simple and positive way not to lose sight of the identity of these two kings is to let the pen of prophecy trace on the map of history the successive rulers of Egypt and Palestine. For the titles of the kings who conquered and who lost these ancient countries are chronicled in this prophetic chapter to preserve the identity and to expose the evil intents of both the king of the south and the king of the north. Mark this carefully, for these transactions of land provide the key to identify these kings from the time of Alexander's death to our time. So there's another distinction in addition to the two factors earlier discussed. Throughout Daniel 11, the angel places emphasis on the kings that were to rule both Palestine, which is presently called the state of Israel, and Egypt. Track 12 says, "The angel emphatically declared that the kings to rule Palestine, together with Egypt, were to be as follows. First, the king of the south, Ptolemy. Second, the king of the north, pagan Rome. Third, the king of the south, Turkey. And fourth, the king of the north, England." Here, in the following 25 pages, are the details of prophecy correlated with history. And that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to go through Daniel 11, and we're also going to support it with the facts of historical events. So it is important to note that not every verse is explained explicitly in track 12. Instead, the identifying acts are brought forward and explained. We will go through every major identifying act of the King of the North in this study. So to help you understand this chronology, painstaking effort has been made to create a timeline so God's people can understand the sequence, the order to these kings or regimes. The beginning of the King of the North and the King of the South prophecy starts with a vision given Daniel about the worldwide kingdom he was currently living in, Medo-Persia. The angel tells Daniel that Grecia is the next to rule and other important details. Let's read Daniel 11, verses 1 through 3.
Also, I in the first year of Darius the Mede, even I stood to confirm and to strengthen him. And now will I show thee the truth. Behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia, and the 4th shall be far richer than they all, and by his strength through his riches he shall stir up all against the realm of Grecia. And a mighty king shall stand up, that shall rule with great dominion, and do according to his will. And when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken, and shall be divided toward the 4 winds of heaven, and not to his posterity, nor according to his dominion which he ruled, for his kingdom shall be plucked up even for others beside those.
So the timeline starts with King Alexander. Alexander the Great died in his youth, and having no heir to the throne, his kingdom was divided among the 4 generals of his army. These 4 generals controlled the realms of Grecia and Persia, which he conquered. Let's look at the timeline. We start over here with the death of Alexander the Great in 323 BC. And by 300 BC, we can see that the kingdom is divided and given to his 4 trusted generals, Lysimachus, Ptolemy, Seleucus, and Cassander. Thus it was, after Alexander's death, the empire was split up, and one part assigned to each of the 4 generals who formed the league. First, Ptolemy assumed regal power in Egypt. Second, Seleucus in Syria and Upper Asia. Third, Lysimachus in Thrace and Asia Minor as far as Taurus. And fourth, Cassander took as his share Macedonia. That's Universal History, page 100. The first thing that happened after the kingdom was split between the 4 generals in 300 BC is that Lysimachus took Cassander's territory to the west in 281 BC, just 19 years later. But soon after, Seleucus takes over Lysimachus's entire territory in 279 BC. That's just 3 years later. So Lysimachus is the first king of the north, and Seleucus is the second king of the north. In 63 BC, Rome takes over Seleucus's territory. But let's pause right here and move back to the king of the south. We're going to move back on the timeline to deal with the king of the south back to 300 BC. Ptolemy became the king of the south at the same time Seleucus gained his territory. The Ptolemaic Empire reigned from 305 BC to 30 BC, a period of about 275 years. So it's important to note that we will have 6 king of the north, you're going to see on the timeline, 6 king of the north and only 2 king of the south. So while the north is going through multiple changes, the south remains relatively stable under one regime, the Ptolemaic Empire. But the Ptolemaic Empire, through the passage of time, grows weaker and weaker. There's several reasons for that. One, they started adopting the Egyptian practice of royals inbreeding or marrying their siblings to keep their line pure, and also by frequent wars with the Syrians, the Seleucidan Empire, and finally Rome. And Rome defeats them eventually, right? By 31 BC, the time of Christ, Rome has emerged as a world power and takes over the Ptolemaic Empire. This takeover is described in verses 15 and 16 of Daniel 11. Let's read it.
So the king of the north shall come and cast up a mount and take the most fenced cities, and the arms of the south shall not withstand, neither his chosen people, neither shall there be any strength to withstand. But he that cometh against him shall do according to his own will, and none shall stand before him. And he shall stand in the glorious land, which by his hand shall be consumed.
The king of the north is coming to take away the king of the south, the Ptolemaic Empire. This scripture definitely brings us to the time of the third regime of the king of the north, that of pagan Rome, which completely overthrew the first regime of the kingdom of the south, that of the Ptolemaic dynasty. And here we can see a map of the Roman Empire shaded in red. In the year 63 BC, the Roman general Pompey marched against Jerusalem. Syria had become a Roman thing. And in 31 BC, Egypt became a Roman province. With the rise of Rome, this time period brings us to the time of Christ, where in Daniel 7:7, the beast that represents pagan Rome rules the civilized world. Remember this 10-horned beast, this nondescript, dreadful beast that treads down the saints of God? It's right here. This is the same thing.
Then shall stand up in his estate a raiser of taxes in the glory of the kingdom. But within few days he shall be destroyed, neither in anger nor in battle.
This is talking about Caesar specifically, because we find in the time of Christ that in Luke 2,
And it came to pass in those days that there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed. And this taxing was first made when Cyrenius was governor of Syria. And all went to be taxed, everyone into his own city.
So the Roman Empire is represented in Daniel 7 as a dreadful, nondescript beast, as I mentioned. But it's a beast that goes through a change, two phases. We have pagan Rome with the 10 horns that's treading down the saints of God in Daniel 7. And then later on in Daniel 7:25, we have those 3 horns removed from the 10 and 1 horn head come up, showing that the church and civil power have become combined, the church-state rule of papal Rome. So the Roman Empire is represented as 2 beasts in 2 different stages. So here in the King of the North study, they are 2 different King of the North regimes. The third King of the North regime is pagan Rome. Then in 538 AD, the fourth King of the North emerges as papal Rome, an engineered church-state rule, which rises in its supremacy and its height at 538 AD. Now, pagan Rome was almost completely defeated by barbarian hordes sweeping down into their territory. We're going to go dive into why this change happened. You can read about it in verse 22, of Daniel 11.
And with the arms of a flood shall they be overflown from before him, and shall be broken. Yea, also the prince of the covenant. And after the league made with him, he shall work deceitfully, for he shall come up and shall become strong with a small people.
Now I'm going to read from track 12, pages 66 through 69, to explain this. From this prophetic statement, we see that Rome was to rise from its ruin and humiliation, and again become strong, but this time by deceit, with a small people. In this chain of prophecy, then, Rome is shown in 2 different phases, pagan and ecclesiastical, just as it is shown by the 4th symbolical beast in Daniel 7. Thus it was, after pagan Rome saw itself overrun and humbled to the ground, down and out, so to speak, it conceived a deceit by which to bring itself to power again. The scheme resulted in an ecclesiastical code of laws, the enforcement of which it carried out with a small people, the so-called Christians. It did not call for the dethroning of kings, but rather for Christianizing them. Thus, peaceably, the king of the north succeeded in putting over his scheme to reign as spiritual king of kings in the name of the Christian's God. First, it reigned over nations. Second, over kings of nations. These historical and biblical facts show that the Christianized nations under one spiritual head constitute Rome's second phase, and inspiration gave him the title King of the North. At his throne, kings and peasants alike, within the far-flung boundaries of Christianized Rome, bowed down in absolute submission and worship. So through subtlety, he again becomes strong, as the following paragraphs of history confirm. So let's get back to the timeline. In 31 BC, at the time of Christ, pagan Rome has worldwide rule of the ancient civilized world. It controls both Israel and Egypt and areas beyond. It did this by defeating the Seleucid Empire and the Ptolemaic. But the barbarian tribes, the Huns, the Vandals, the Visigoths, Ostrogoths, Franks, Jutes, and Saxons give them much trouble, marching into their territory, causing havoc by 477 AD. So, by deceit, pagan Rome, in a bid for survival, adopts Christianity in order to bring peace within her borders, but also to Christianize the barbarian hordes. So how does papal Rome tame barbarous nations? Let's read a little bit about this point in history. The bishops or overseers of the Christian churches at first demeaned themselves in the meek spirit of the founder of their religion, but at length they sought temporal power and worldly advantage. The bishops of the great cities assumed authority over those of surrounding country. The Rome, Constantinople, Alexandria, Antioch, and Jerusalem became the seats of ecclesiastical power, and their bishops might be said to constitute an oligarchy in the church. Rome became, through the Dark Ages, a king of kings, nay more. He assumed to be in the place of God. Universal History, pages 198-199. At the coronation of Charlemagne, Pope Leo III, after placing the crown upon his head, saluted him with the title of Emperor of the Romans. He had quelled the barbarous nations of Europe, with the exception of the Danes or Normans, and his kingdom comprised France, Germany, Italy, and the north of Spain. From the east, Irene, the Empress of Constantinople, sought his friendship, and even the Caliph of Baghdad, the princely Harun Rashid, entered into correspondence with him and sent him the keys of the Holy Sepulchre of Jerusalem. Charlemagne, though a barbarian who at first could not write his name, but signed treaties with the hilt of his sword and enforced them with its point, had yet great sympathy with learned men. Widukind, the most valiant and renowned of their chiefs, at last embraced Christianity and resigned his arms. Charlemagne then obliged the Saxon people, under penalty of death, to receive baptism. He invaded and conquered the Huns and Sclavonians. Charles, unable to repel the invaders, ceded to them the province of Neustria, thereafter called Normandy, and gave to Rollo his daughter in marriage. The Norman chief was, however, to do homage to Charles, kneeling and kissing the royal toe. Alfred, King of England, granted the Danes permission to settle in Northumberland in East Anglia, on condition of their being governed by his laws and embracing Christianity. They were accordingly baptized, and the king himself stood godfather for Guthrum, their chief. In this subtle manner came the king of the north, and he obtained the kingdom by flatteries, verse 21, and by honoring the God of forces, as prophesied in verses 24, 38, 39. It also says in Daniel 11, he divides the land for gain. Okay, so he divided these lands, Christianized the barbarians. And there's whole movies about this, whole series about how they Christianized these barbarous people, the Saxons, the Vikings, all that, the Huns, and they made them pay homage to the church. And so Rome revives itself by the resurgence of a religious church state, but it also brings the Dark Ages. So now we're going to go through Daniel 11, 30, and 34, because we're going to see that the king of the south is going to rise again and challenge, get this, challenge Rome.
For the ships of Chittim shall come against him. Therefore he shall be grieved and return and have indignation against the holy covenant.
What is that? That's the Sabbath being trodden down, in parentheses are added.
So shall he do, he shall even return and have intelligence with them that forsake the holy covenant. And arms shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate.
In our previous studies, we've talked about this. We talked about verse 31. Now, this all speaks to the three things that happened when papal Rome, that system of worship, came into play. First of all, it was an amalgamation of paganism and Christianity. And the Christians made concessions, the bishops of the church, supposing they could do more with uniting with the civil powers. Okay. And so one of the things that happens is this priesthood comes up. Okay. And that priesthood is the abomination that makes desolate, because it puts man in the place of Christ. The Bible says that Christ is our high priest. He's our intercessor. And it's through his intercessory actions in the heavenly sanctuary that our sins are forgiven and purged away. And what the paganism and Christianity, the amalgamation of that did was they created their own priesthood made of men. Another thing they did was they got rid of the Sabbath day. Now, the early Christian church, they kept the Sabbath. Okay, that's part of the divine law of God. Well, they outlawed it. The church wrote canons against it, saying and penalizing people who they said kept the Jewish Sabbath. Now they're making a distinction. They wanted Sunday to be the day of worship to appease the pagans. The pagans worshiped the sun god, and that was a holy day for them. So now the church has forsaken the Holy Covenant, because remember, the Sabbath is part of the Ten Commandment, divine law of God's universe. It never was done away with. It was instituted in creation. But yet, it's taken away, right? They take away the daily.
And such as do wickedly against the covenant shall he corrupt by flatteries. But the people that do know their God shall be strong and do exploits.
This is talking about a power contrary to this huge monstrosity of civil church state regime coming and being rebellious and doing exploits. This is talking about the Protestants.
And they that understand among the people shall instruct many, yet they shall fall by the sword, and by flame, by captivity, and by spoil many days. Now when they shall fall, they shall be holpen with a little help, but many shall cleave to them with flatteries.
The Bible here is predicting martyrdom for the Christian church, for the true saints of God. Now, when they fall, they shall be holpen with a little help. That's the Protestant Reformation. So in verses 28, 30, and 32, Rome sees the necessity of compromising with the heathen in order to make an easy prey of them. Therefore, he sets his heart against the Holy Covenant. Verses 28, 30, and 32, that is, he dropped from the Christian's creed the Sabbath of creation. We talked about that. The king of the north having intelligence with those who did forsake the holy covenant, it clears 2 points. First of all, not everyone forsook the Sabbath. And second, the small people with which he became strong were not the faithful followers of Christ, but the unfaithful ones. And such as do wickedly against the covenant shall he corrupt by flatteries. But the people that do know their God and be strong and do exploits, this verse reveals the character of each class. First, it shows the unfaithful, and second, the faithful. And as to the destiny of the faithful, we see that they will go through martyrdom. They'll fall by sword, by flame, by captivity, and by spoil many days. That period of time was a long time, and during the Dark Ages. Now, when they fall, they shall be hoping with a little help. We talked about that. That's the martyrdom. That's the Protestant Reformation, the little help. But the Protestant Reformation is foretold not to come to completion, okay, because of flatteries. We'll see that movement has been diluted and watered down. So let's go back to the timeline. The fourth king of the north is papal Rome, coming to supremacy in 538 AD. And from her rule comes the Dark Ages. But during this time, around 814 AD, the Ottoman Empire, the Mohammedans, begin to rise, and they become the second king of the south. This is detailed in Daniel 11, 25, 29, and 30. We know this because Rome loses the Holy Land and Egypt during their rise. Let's read a little factoid about this second king of the south. The only regime that has risen from the south since the Ptolemaic dynasty went down and that has ruled Egypt and Palestine is that of the Moors, a Mohammedan Arabic-speaking race of mixed descent, forming part of the population of Barbary and deriving their name from the Mori, the ancient inhabitants of Mauritania, whose pure lineal descendants are a branch of the Berbers. The modern Moors have sprung from a union of ancient inhabitants of this region and their Arab conquerors, who appeared in the 7th century as Mohammedan conquerors of the Visigoths in Spain, 711 to 713 AD, came from North Africa. The name Moor, that was applied to them by the Spanish chroniclers. And that connection is synonymous with Arab and Saracen. These Moors pushed northward into France until they're repulsed by Charles Martel at the Great Battle of Tours in 732 AD, after which they practically restricted themselves to Spain south of the Ebro and the Sierra Guadarrama. The expelled Moors settling in the north of Africa founded cities from which to harass the Spanish coast, and finally developed into the piratical states of Barbary, whose depredations were a source of irritation to the civilized Christian powers, even well into the present century. That's 20th Century Cyclopedia, Volume 6, page 24. The conflicts between the South and the North following the Greco-Roman Wars were between the Mohammedans and the Christians. At that time, therefore, while the title King of the North applies to the rulers of Christianized Rome, the title King of the South applies to Mohammedan rulers. So in this study, we've kind of just put all the Arab nations together, the Muslims, okay, because they are the successors of Muhammad's empire and different regimes. For the sake of the study, we're using the name Mohammedans for all, as if they were one regime. So, understanding history, it's impossible to misapply these titles at this point in time. The verses fit. So, they're actually giving credit, victory to the King of the South. And history shows at the exact time the scripture points out, the Mohammedans arose from Africa and also invaded the Christian nations north of the Mediterranean. than it was that Rome lost Egypt and Palestine. By 1814 AD, Rome, papal Rome, the king of the north, that's the fourth king of the north, had already ceded Egypt and Palestine to the Mohammedans, the king of the south. Conscious dominating Christianity from the north and conscious dominating Mohammedanism from the south have ever since been in territorial and religious conflict. And whichever one took a slice of the other's dominion, he forced, upon penalty of death for nonconformity, his religious beliefs upon his captives. Isn't that history? The Roman Church, don't want to be under us? You're dead. We'll kill you. Mohammedanism, you don't want to be a Muslim? You're dead. We're going to kill you. And in some places, it's still like that today, right? They don't truly have freedom in those countries. So map 9 shows the final results, the nations that were permanently Christianized and nations that were permanently Mohammedanized. Okay. Now we're going to explain something else, and a very important part, and that's in Daniel 11, verse 27. We're going to explain the phrase, both spoke lies at one table. This is very important as it has been the cause of many wars and conflicts in this region. Verse 27 says,
And both these kings' hearts shall be to do mischief, and they shall speak lies at one table, but it shall not prosper, for yet the end shall be at the time appointed.
The one table at which both kings speak is, of course, figurative. That is, ecclesiastical Rome declared to their captives that the Roman religion was foreshadowed by the angel Gabriel's announcement to Mary, that she was to bear a son, the Savior of the world. Likewise, Muhammad next declared to the same people at the same table when they became their captives that the angel Gabriel appeared to Muhammad and gave him the religion which all the people of earth must have. Though Rome's declaration as to just what Gabriel said to Mary is founded in fact, Rome's actual religion, merely coded with Christianity, we know that's an amalgamation of paganism and Christianity, was not truly Christ's religion. As to Muhammad receiving his religion from the angel Gabriel, he never did. Thus, both the Mohammedanized pashas and the Christianized lords were speaking lies at one table, the peoples. But these shall not prosper, declared the angel, for yet the end shall be at the appointed time. That is, their false religions will come to an end at that time. They will not endure forever. To review, Rome eventually loses power by the Protestant Reformation weakening its influence throughout the world, and the rise of the King of the South, the Mohammedans or the Ottoman Empire. Rome loses the Holy Land to Egypt, and then it is time for a new King of the North to emerge, the fifth one. Let's read verse 40 again.
And at the time of the end shall the King of the South push at him, and the King of the North shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots, and with horsemen, and with many ships, and he shall enter into the countries, and shall overflow and pass over.
Now, what King of the North did this? A new King of the North emerges to take the Holy Land from the Mohammedans and goes into a lot of countries after World War I. And who did this? History shows that Britain overtook the Ottoman Empire during World War I. Therefore, England is the fifth King of the North. The British Empire defeated the Ottoman Empire in World War I. On October 30th, 1918, aboard the British battleship Agamemnon, Ottoman officials and British officials signed an armistice treaty marking the end of the Ottoman Empire's participation in World War I. The British Empire had captured Basra, Baghdad, Jerusalem, Damascus, and Aleppo. The Ottomans lost 59% of their land area, and 2 of their armies were annihilated. Later, the Ottoman Empire was completely dismantled by treaty and came to an end in 1922. Great Britain did that. So let's read verse 44 to find out what happens to England, the 5th king of the north. But tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go forth with great fury to destroy utterly, to make away many. England is not going to retain this title for long, we're going to see, because Germany and Russia from the north, and also Japan from the east, the rumors which put Great Britain and her allies into World War II are therefore the tidings which brought the war, in which, though supposedly the war was won, weakened rather than strengthened the British Empire. Now, let's review. Around 1883, and the underlying factors are due to the Protestant Reformation, England begins to rise to power. It becomes the 5th king of the north as it defeats the Ottoman Empire in 1919 during World War I. Tidings out of the east and north would come from the start of World War II from Japan and Germany. And even though the Allies won this war, the British Empire was permanently weakened. When Hitler comes on the scene, he is the he that dashes in pieces in Nahum. Okay? He breaks Europe, the old world, and shatters it, right? And it's not the same after this war. And as a result of that, London was bombed, it was decimated, and the British Empire begins to shrink. So after the war, in 1948, England creates the State of Israel. It makes Palestine a 2-state territory. Okay? It creates this in the deeply contested Holy Land. And this will bring us to the last king of the north. King of the north, number 6. To see when this king of the north, number 6, comes on the scene, he appears in verse 45. And this is the very last act of the king of the north. It's a new king of the north. And he shall plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. We have to understand that there's another king of the north that is to arise to fulfill verse 45. Another Christian power has since risen and inherited the title. So who is this other king of the north, the last one who comes to his end and none helps him? We also have to know what his evil intents are, because that's the whole purpose of the delineation of the 2 kings in Daniel 11, is to get down to the last one and see what he's going to do, the evil actions against God's people. To find out who this king of the north is, we only have to ask, who is the world power who is controlling the Holy Land? It's America. Since 1948, the United States has become the biggest supporter of Israel, giving billions of dollars of aid each year, supplying them with weapons, making the United States the last king of the North. America is the 6th king of the North regime to rule the Holy Land. They may be ruling by proxy, but they still rule it. America is also known as the 2-horned beast, the 2-horned lamb-like beast in Revelation 13. and it has an evil intent to form a church-state confederacy by the healing of the deadly wound, thereby bringing the time of trouble upon the saints. Okay? Bringing the time of trouble upon the saints. We must understand that this beast, found in Revelation 13, starting with verse 11, this beast comes out of the land and not the sea. Okay? It's not coming from the old world. It's a totally new nation to arise. Okay? It comes up as a lamb, but then in the end, it speaks as a dragon. And that's exactly what happened with the United States. It came up, it had good principles as far as the Constitution. Now, those rights were extended to everyone at first. We had to fight for that, right? But the Constitution was a divinely inspired document, and it was made by people who were fleeing religious persecution, Protestants. Okay, that's why they came here. And they wanted the freedom to worship as they pleased, okay, to worship God the way that He wanted. They wanted the freedom to read the Bible, okay? They didn't want anybody threatening to kill them. The wars were being fought in the old world. So America comes up as a lamb, but we're seeing the enact in the Revelation and here in Daniel 11, verse 45, is that America is going to speak as a dragon. And how is it going to speak? Through its laws. A nation speaks through its laws. So it will eventually have the dragon's voice. Who is going to be behind these laws that America is going to change? It's the devil, the dragon. Let's read more about it. The spirit of prophecy also states that the king of the north, brought to view in Daniel 11:45 and the two-horned beast of Revelation 13, is the same power. And it's this beast that shall bear the mystical number 666. And that's America. We quote, "This power is the last that treads down the true church of God." And as the true church is still trodden down and cast out by all Christendom, it follows that the last oppressive power has not yet come to his end. That's quoting Daniel 11, verse 45. And Michael has not stood up. This last power that treads down the saints is brought to view in Revelation 13, 11 through 18. His number is 666. That's a word to the little flock. Page 8 and 9. Now, many people are looking for the resurgence of the papal power, the Catholic Church. They're going to be the ones doing this. But Rome is limited in what it can do, being that it is no longer a leading world power. It has to be a country with the arms, power, and influence throughout the world that does this. Now, of course, they're paying homage to Rome because they're making an image of that church-state confederacy, but it's still not Rome who leads it out. It's high time that we realize that Rome is only the wounded head on the leopard-like beast of Revelation 13, and it's the United States who heals it. Let's read a few statements from Last Day Events, pages 131 and 133. When the leading churches of the United States, uniting upon such points of doctrine as are held by them in common, that's the evangelicals, shall influence the state to enforce their decrees and to sustain their institution, then Protestant America will have formed an image of the Roman hierarchy, and the infliction of civil penalties upon dissenters will inevitably result. When our nation, in its legislative councils, shall enact laws to bind the consciences of men in regard to their religious privileges, enforcing Sunday observance, and bringing oppressive power to bear against those who keep the seventh-day Sabbath, the law of God will, to all intents and purposes, be made void in our land, and national apostasy will be followed by national ruin. And so this is what we need to understand. This phenomenon of the United States totally dismantling its constitution and changing from the land of the free to the land of the oppressed is going to be spurred by this religious movement. And this religious movement is not going to be the Sunday law right off the bat. That's not going to be the first thing to happen. It's going to happen in stages. Isaiah 8, say ye not a confederacy, that time is when all the churches are getting together. They're uniting, they're organizing, and they're going to the government and they're changing the government, right? They're going to get their stuff legislated. The Adventist church, God's church, will be asked to join this confederacy. That's why we are given special direction in Isaiah 8 and the spirit of prophecy, never to join in a confederacy with the world. We're not to join with the other churches. We have a special message. We are repairers of the breach. We are not to join in any confederacy, supposing we could do more, supposing we could have more influence if we just let our guard down a little, if we just make less distinct our message, the three angels' messages. No, no, no. We are warned not to join this confederacy, but not only not to join it, the Bible says, say ye not a confederacy. That means we are to lift our voices up against it in pen and voice. So what happens in America, the rest of the world will follow. But America will be punished when she begins to oppress those who are upholding the Ten Commandments, the Sabbath. Those who are making that repair in the breach, so to speak. It will be Jacob's time of trouble, but he shall be saved out of it. During this time, those who seek death shall not find it. There will be a death decree attached to this oppression. Those who seek to save their lives from the death decree by submitting to the authorities will be eternally lost. Those who are faithful will seek death by opposing this confederacy. They will be rewarded by being gathered into God's kingdom. This is a shaking, testing time in the church. Two classes will be revealed, the wheat and the tares. The tares will want to join this confederacy, supposing they could accomplish more. The wheat will oppose the confederacy and be saved. This is the final judgment in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and God intervenes against two classes in the church. The tares will move against their brethren. They will seek civil power and authority in order to oppress their brethren in the church. So God has to intervene. He has to execute Ezekiel 9 by his angels in order to save his church. So this is why this prophecy is so important. This is why we need to know who the King of the North is and his identifying acts. So let's review. In 281 BC, Lysimachus added to his dominion Cassander's territory to the west, becoming the very first king of the north. Lysimachus is the first king of the north. Then in 279 BC, Seleucus defeated Lysimachus and seized his kingdom, whereupon the northwest and northwest divisions became one. By doing this, Seleucus becomes the second king of the north. The third king of the north is pagan Rome, who in verse 15 and 16 takes both the north and south and rules both Egypt and Palestine. Rome does this by overthrowing the Ptolemaic Empire, which has ruled as king of the south for almost 300 years. But pagan Rome begins to lose power and is almost defeated due to the barbarian hordes, so it will change and rise again. The fourth king of the north is papal Rome. It rises through a small people, adopts Christianity, converts the barbarians to Christianity, and divides the land for gain. Papal Rome forsakes the covenant by getting rid of the Sabbath of creation. But there will rise a movement of faithful saints who sit at their table through the Protestant Reformation, which weakens Rome's influence and power. Another weakening factor for Rome during the Dark Ages, the Mohammedans rise, the Muslims, and papal Rome is eventually defeated by the Turks in 1516. Rome loses both Egypt and Palestine to the Mohammedans. Now, as the Ottoman Empire begins to wane, a new king of the north emerges. Britain enters the world stage, and in 1883, Egypt is ruled by Great Britain, and by 1919, World War I, Britain overtakes the Ottoman Empire. But soon, World War II will start, and tidings out of the east and the north shall trouble Britain, and he goes out with great fury. And although World War II was won by the Allies, it weakens Great Britain, the fifth king of the north. Now, this brings us down to the last king of the north, the sixth one. In 1948, to solve the problem of displaced Jews from the war, Britain creates the State of Israel in Palestine. The U.S. begins supplying Israel with aid and weapons to the tune of billions of dollars each year, making them the last king of the north. The very last thing to be fulfilled is in Daniel 11:45, where it says, "And he shall plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas in the glorious holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him." The United States is predicted to fall in the gigantic war centered in Jerusalem. So let's summarize the events surrounding Michael standing up. First, we know there is to be a gigantic war surrounding Israel, and as you currently see, the United States will be heavily involved. Now, Iran just sent over hundreds of drones with missiles to attack Israel. And Biden was in the middle of something, and he stopped what he was doing to deal with that conflict and to help Israel block those drones, and they were successful in that. Now, many people are celebrating, saying, yes, Israel is going to be successful and God's with Israel, but they don't understand. Those are the unbelieving Jews, and God is not with them like we think. They have rejected Christ. They do not have any information that could help save any souls, okay, for God's kingdom. So when we look at the prophecies concerning Jerusalem, we look at the gigantic war. It says, "I will gather all nations at Jerusalem to battle, and the houses shall be rifled, and the women ravished." What the Bible is saying is Israel will not be successful in this war. They will lose this war. And so will the United States. The United States, it says, will come to its end during this war. So during this war, the sealing in the Seventh-day Adventist Church will be completed. Ezekiel 9 is executed by God's angels, removing the wicked in the church. Remember, we talked about the brethren in the church that are unfaithful, that are for joining this confederacy, will turn against their brothers in the church and try to use the civil powers, and God has to intervene. So Michael standing up and delivering everyone who is in the book of life, first in the church and then the rest of the world, the great multitude, shows that he is taking the first step in establishing his eternal kingdom. He will gather his children into his kingdom. Remember, Jacob's time of trouble starts as he journeys home to the promised land. So, having all this information, what should we do as Christians? Knowing that the prophetic texts in Daniel 11 takes us right down to the time we are living in, to our current events. We must now make our calling and election sure. It's time for us to do some soul searching, to get ready, to make things right with our Lord. We need to be ministering to our children, our relatives, our loved ones, our friends, while there is still time. And we must also use this time to put the warning out about these last day events so all can be aware of the right course to take. All souls need to know the right course. They need to know about the true Sabbath. They need to know about the law of God. They need to know what it's going to take to fit into the society of heaven. So we have to become faithful sentinels, faithful watchmen. We have to give the trumpet a certain sound. Now is the time. We can no longer sit on our laurels waiting for these detrimental events to happen. We have to do all in our power while we can. So, saints, I pray that you have the courage and that God will help you and me to be faithful to our calling. Please don't forget, for more studies, you can visit us at foodfortheflock.com. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel at F4Flock. And if you want to make a study request, email us at foodfortheflock or f4flock@gmail.com. Thanks.